Welcome back, everyone. Sorry, I know it's been a little while, but I've been a little busy, and with the new Season 8 Siege update coming, I figured I'd take a little bit of time to not do a whole lot last week, and instead focus on all the new stuff that's going to be coming out as we go through this week. But not too long ago, I had discussed wanting to make a video talking about some basic tips and tricks for people to get to the higher levels of gameplay, such as Absolute and Lethal. However, when I was playing the other day with one of my friends online, just helping him grind out some lower tier armory data, one of the things I was kind of reminded of was there have been a lot of new players recently coming to Space Marine 2 compared to when the game first came out. This game is doing phenomenal and continues to do phenomenal. And so instead of just focusing on the absolute highest of difficulties, I wanted to do something that's a little bit more inclusive, throw out some basic tips that I had either wish I had knew at the beginning of playing Space Marine 2, or just some things that I have found to be useful after the countless days that I've poured into this game. But nothing in here is going to be in any sort of order. Honestly, it might just kind of sound a little bit like a Schizo rant, so I do apologize for that, but just wanted to throw some things out there, hopefully help some newer players in having a better time with the game and just improving their overall experience. So first thing that I would throw out, and I would actually say this is something that's really helped me on like Lethal and Absolute, that is always making sure that fun is at the forefront of this game. So just like a lot of things out there, there can be times in Space Marine 2 where you feel discouraged or just stressed out because, hey, the game director in here, sometimes it's your best friend. Other days it wakes up and chooses violence. And when you're on the end of it where it's choosing violence, it's very easy to feel discouraged and just want to put the controller down and not push yourself to playing on higher difficulties. But there's nothing wrong with taking a break here and there, dropping the difficulty, making yourself feel like a badass, even if it means playing on minimal. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a good way to keep yourself in good spirits and hopefully get you in a better headspace where you can play on some of those higher end difficulties, whatever they may be. But in terms of actual gameplay tips, we'll focus on the actual meat and potatoes going forward here. But one of the biggest things that I would say that I've learned is just the sheer amount of knowledge that goes into a lot of these different operations. One of the things that I did very early on was I was completely guilty of it. I would try to speed run a lot of operations because I wanted to hurry up, get my XP, get the new cosmetics, rank up all my gear. And I felt like I missed out a lot on some of the small little details that's found within each operation. So for me, I always felt comfortable enough that I knew where a lot of the main checkpoints were in the map. So I kind of figured, I don't really have to pay too much attention to these ammo boxes here. I know where the main ones spawn, and that's good enough for me. However, as I started playing on higher difficulties such as Substantial, and then eventually Ruthless, and finally Lethal and Absolute, started to kick myself in the butt because there were a lot of times when I would find that I would be needing resources and I didn't know where any of the hard spawns were outside of the natural checkpoints that you see in the game. So I'm sure a lot of you know what I'm referencing. Whenever you hit a certain point in the operation, there's always going to be a certain time where ammo's dedicated to spawn. Usually you also get a stim kit, grenades, resources like that. However, that being said, I neglected that there were other locations on the map where there were guaranteed spawns or very near guaranteed spawns of similar equipment. Along with that, also not paying attention to where Guardian relics were, since sometimes I was playing at a difficulty that I wasn't really meant to be playing at just yet. So going through running the maps, especially playing them on a difficulty that you feel extremely comfortable with, is such a huge way in that to gain game knowledge that is absolutely important once you start hitting some of those other difficulties. One of the big things that I like to keep in mind every time there's a new operation that comes out is I like to kind of take a look at the geography of that operation, or rather not the geography, but like the layout. Are there a lot of open sight lines? Are there any sections where maybe it's extremely close quarters? Where are the loadout swaps at? On top of that, other things that I'll try to pay attention to is there a potential terminus spawn on this operation? Now, I know with the new Absolute update that's going to be coming out, they are talking about adding in terminus level enemies onto operations where they previously wouldn't spawn, such as decapitation. However, if you're not playing at those difficulties, it's still worthwhile to figure out, is there a chance that, you might see a terminus on that mission? Because one of the things that, especially earlier today when I was playing with some of my friends, there were a lot of times where we were going into those terminus fights extremely under-equipped just because we were using up all of our resources before we even got to the main fight itself. But with that being said, the next piece of advice I would throw out to individuals is also understanding how the wave mechanics in here work. So a lot of times whenever you see that there's going to be an enemy wave, initially one of the things that I tried to do was, I'm just going to go right into the next section and I'll just skip this fight because maybe I'm on a little bit of a time crunch. I learned this the hard way after numerous attempts that just because you can maybe go through a door doesn't always mean that that's going to stop a wave from spawning. Now, there are some areas in some operations where, yes, this will occur. You'll go into a brand new area and nothing will bother to spawn from that wave in the next room that you enter. However, a lot of other times, that's not necessarily true. So while you may be thinking, hey, if I ride this elevator here, I'm not going to have to deal with the wave, there is a chance you actually could be putting yourself in a worse position. Good example would be on the very first operation, Inferno. Once you deploy the bomb, you're navigating some of those smaller rooms. Right before you get to that elevator, a lot of times I see people, whenever they hear the cue for the enemy wave, one of the first things they want to do is go riding up that elevator. However, when I'm playing with my friends, what dictates that is, have we seen a terminus spawn yet? Because if not, there's always going to be a chance that once we go up that elevator, not only are we going to be trying to manage that horde, but now we're going to have either a Carnifex or a Neurothrope on top of it. It may already be a hard fight, but once you factor in an enemy like that, it's only going to get even harder. So, communicating with your teammates, very important thing to do, and kind of discussing like, hey, if we do end up riding this elevator or going through this door, is everyone going to be ready to deal with the possible event that maybe there's a Carnifex or a Hellbrute waiting for us, behind that section? Because if not, it may be worthwhile just trying to hold out where you're currently at and making a stand there. Another thing though, and I would honestly say this is probably the most important thing I could throw out, is how important it is to learn the melee system in this game. Now, I will say on its surface, it is rather simple. I think it's actually really easy to learn but hard to master. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why I love it so much, is there's just so many small little minute details that go into the melee combat. But it is the one thing that I've noticed that as I've gotten better with the melee combat, my chances of survival have drastically increased. So a lot of times the game will naturally tell you if an attack is parryable or if you just need to flat out dodge it. However, depending on what enemies you're facing, that's not always true. There are times where you'll see that, hey, this well, we'll use like this sniper here that's currently on screen. If I get close enough, there's going to be a chance that, he might move in such a manner that indicates that it's going to go for an attack. Now, I'm not given the blue color to indicate that, or am I given the red color? It's just something that you can naturally do. Same thing with a lot of the Minoris enemies. A lot of them can be parried. I think other than the Chaos Cultist, you can block their attacks to gain back some armor. It's a nice way to easily refresh your armor. There's an example of it right there in case you find yourself getting hit. And if you don't have a health pack, it can be a great way to keep you in the fight. Now, that being said, I have also noticed that while doing this, if I am low on armor already, there is a chance that I will be taking some hits to my health. However, it's better than taking straight hit to your health, even if I'm not getting a full piece of armor back. With that being said, Space Marine 2 does also have 3 different styles of melee options. You have block, which does not allow you to perfectly parry. However, a lot of times I've noticed those weapons do tend to deal more damage or have better cleaving potential. And since one of the earlier updates, you can also unleash some massive area of effect damage with them. They're really good if you're wanting to dish out a bunch of damage. However, it does remove the option to parry, which if you're not able to parry, a lot of times that will also remove the mechanics of the gun strikes. Balance is right in the middle. Normally have good damage, good weapon speed, same thing with cleaving potential. However, you are going to have to be right on the money when it comes to dealing with different enemies. And that's not always a bad thing, because I do think it's a solid starting point. Figure out if you can get that timing down really quick. It might not even be worth switching over to another style of melee. However, like myself, when I was struggling, one of the things that I did was I switched over to fencing. And honestly, I ended up falling in love with it just because of how much melee combat I personally tend to do. It is something that I noticed really helped keep me alive and just allow me to have better gameplay in general. So don't ever be hesitant about trying out different forms of melee combat. They all have their perks, they all have their downsides. It's good for you, the player, to decide what works best for you, and then kind of just go from there. Another thing that I would throw out is it's totally worth investing your time learning the enemy attack patterns. So that's actually one of the other reasons that I'm currently doing this gameplay that you see with the Trigon is when this operation first came out and I had been running it a couple times, I was doing extremely well with it. However, just haven't touched it in a while, and I've noticed I've been really rusty in this particular fight. So decided to come back, try to relearn a little bit of the timing that goes along with this fight. Just that way, if I ever decide to play it on another difficulty that's even higher, it should hopefully do better. You don't want to just learn that for the Terminus enemies. It's good to learn that for all the enemies, especially the Minoris, because like I said, you can farm off armor off of them, and plus, the way that the Tyranids respond is different than the way Chaos responds, and that's something else that I would throw out as well. If you do find yourself struggling to try and keep pace with 2 different factions of enemies, it might be good just to try and grind out a couple of your favorite operations where it only features 1 archetype of enemies, which honestly is rather easy because other than Vox Liberatus, you only ever see 1 faction in an operation. Like I said, Vox Liberatus, though, is the exception to the rule. That one you will encounter both Chaos and Tyranids. But there are small little intricacies about each particular faction that it's good to learn. I always try to prioritize learning the Minoris and the Majoris first, just because those are going to be the ones that you tend to see more often. And then after that, Extremis, just because, again, you're more likely to see them than a Terminus. So learning how they interact not just with you as the player, but with also the map and other enemies that are available as well. It's just good to keep those things in mind. Now, to kind of circle back and talk about loadouts, I know a lot of people, we already have all 3 of our loadouts used probably with our favorite guns, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, if you are a newer player, it might be worthwhile trying to keep in several different loadouts that best fit certain situations. So, to use an example, the Vanguard. The Vanguard is a class that I absolutely love to play. A lot of times I find myself gravitating towards close range combat with it. Because I know I'm going to be doing a lot of close range combat with it naturally, in terms of primary weapons, I've noticed that I gravitate more towards ranged weapons. This is mainly because I already know I'm going to excel in close range combat, so I want to have something to help me out with ranged enemies. Another good example would be is I really love playing the Bulwark, and enemies like Zoranthropes and Neurothropes, they do tend to cause me a little bit of grief here and there, just because of the fact that, you know, there's not really a whole lot you can do from the ground with a power sword, so you're really stuck with the secondary. So if I'm playing another class where I have those options that, hey, I know this next section of the map here is going to be extremely close quarters, I'll make sure I'm running a close quarters loadout. But I also like to take into account things like, have I encountered the Terminus enemy yet? The main reason for this is, especially on higher difficulties, so probably the best close range weapon in this game is going to be, of course, either the Melta rifle or the multi-Melta. They're phenomenal for that. However, on higher difficulties, they're going to do less damage against bosses just because there was a nerf earlier on. So that is something I do like to keep in mind, that if I haven't encountered that style of enemy yet, it might be good for me to hold off until maybe it's absolutely necessary for me to change classes, if at all. So always make sure that you're getting the most out of your loadouts. I know ranking up weapons can sometimes be a bit of a grind, and I get it, that does suck, but it's good to do early on. That way you're going to have a class that's tailored to whatever particular operation or enemy types that you're going to be coming up against. Now, one of the final things that I would honestly throw out is managing resources, because I feel that that's another very important thing to do. Whenever I first started playing, there were a lot of times where I was trying to grab every little thing on the map for myself. And honestly, that wasn't the way to go. This game is built around playing as a team. And so you want to make sure that not only are you getting the resources that you need, but also check in with your teammates in that. There have been a lot of times where I've been playing with some people online, and we might have one teammate that's struggling, which is totally fine. Not everybody has to be at the same level. But if I see a stim kit or something like that, and I see somebody struggling, I feel it's better for that person to grab it so I can help keep them in the fight. Because if they're still in the fight, not only are they still contributing to the team, but they're also having fun as well. However, there are some people where they just feel like they gotta nab every little thing, and it definitely can make the game less fun for everyone else on the team. The other thing too is taking into account what particular class you're playing. So again, as someone who's running the Bulwark a lot, I don't always feel the need to grab the small little ammo boxes that you find on the map. Now, of course, my current gameplay here, I am playing another melee-focused class. However, I'm also just doing a private match just to kind of wind down for the night before I eventually head to bed here. But if I were playing with teammates, even if I am using my secondary to engage targets at range, I'm still going to make sure that, my other teammates, whether they be like a sniper or a heavy, they're going to be getting first dibs on the ammo boxes that are around. Same thing as if, I find an armor boost. So currently, one of the AI is a Vanguard. Now again, AI is not going to pick up anything on the field, but that would be something that would be worthwhile throwing out if it were a human teammate, that, hey, you're probably going to get more use out of this than I am, since as the Assault, I already have 3 bars of armor, but Vanguard and Sniper, they only have 2. So you might actually find that they get more use out of them. Now, that being said, too, there are times where, there's going to be an all-star on the team, and sometimes it's worth making sure that person stays alive. I will be the first to admit it. Whenever I first started playing on Lethal, I was a little over my head with it. However, thankfully, there were a lot of really good players that I was able to pair up with early on. And in all honesty, keeping them alive was a lot more important than keeping me alive, because there were times, and even now still, sometimes I'm just having an off day. I'm not holding my own. I'd rather keep the guy in play that's doing a lot of the work versus just trying to keep myself in the game purely to be alive. Sometimes it's, again, just better to have the better player alive than have a useless body on the field. Now, one of the other great things about Space Marine 2 is even if you're not a social person, a lot of the communication in this game can be done with just very simple commands. So, of course, just simply looking at something, and at least for Xbox, so that's the controller scheme that I'm using. It may change depending on if you're on PC or PlayStation. But if I just hit up on the arrow pad, I can point out, hey, here's an ammo box. Hey, here's a stim kit, or whatever it is. Very simple way to communicate to someone that if you're looking for this particular resource, here it is. Same thing goes along with the fact that I can also mark other areas on the map, or just by using some of the other squad-based communication techniques, it's kind of let people know without having to actually speak to them, which honestly, a lot of times just by pointing out stuff on the map, I find that I'm able to communicate with my teammates just fine. And that's also really handy too, especially when you're playing on lethal or absolute. So as you can see up at the top of my screen, it says that there are still Minoris targets available. However, once you hit those two difficulties, that goes away. So you'll still get the audio cue. Sorry, my brain shut off there a little bit. But you'll still get the audio cue. However, you don't know where they're at, anything like that, so it's always a good thing just to mark them. If you see them, that way everybody knows, okay, here's where they spawned in, here's what it is, this is what we can expect, and you can try to work out a way that best suits the rest of the team on how to engage. Finally, the other thing that I would throw out is take some time to experiment around with classes. There's a lot of different perks, and a lot of them have synergies that you wouldn't expect looking at them just on their own. But never be afraid to experiment with your classes and take a look through all the different perks. For me personally, that was one of the cool things about Prestige mode was, honestly, when I first hit 25, I really didn't do a whole lot of work with my perks. I just kind of found, hey, this is what everybody else is using, therefore it must be really good. And since coming back to revisit it, I found perks that just tend to work a little bit better with my playstyle. Also, something that I would throw out as well, just to kind of piggyback off talking about classes, is if you ever do find yourself struggling with some of the higher difficulties and you're playing with friends, it might be worth looking at your team composition. So, kind of like I alluded to before I filmed this particular gameplay video here to talk about this stuff, I was doing some runs on Absolute, and like I said, we were 1 for 4 for the night. And honestly, I feel like a lot of that had to do with our personal class composition. I was running the Bulwark, I had a friend who was running the Vanguard, but running the Melta Rifle, and then another friend who was actually ranking up his Plasma Caster, so in total fairness, he was a little bit under-leveled gear-wise, but one of the things is a lot of our weapons were all really geared towards close range. So whenever we did have like enemies that we couldn't just snipe from across the map, like the Zoranthropes for instance, it did cause us to struggle a little bit. So making sure that your team composition is good is a really good thing to keep an eye on. I will say for the most part, as long as you have good players piloting whatever class it is, you should be fine. But if you do find yourself struggling, it might be worth coming back to the table and taking a look at some of that stuff. For me, anytime I'm helping a newer player through Absolute, since I already have all my classes finished up, I like to take a look at what everybody else is running and kind of make sure we have all distances on the battlefield covered. So if I see that I'm going to be playing with a player playing Assault, and maybe we have a tactical, I might grab maybe the Sniper or the Heavy, just because I know those two particular classes are really going to dominate at long range, while the Tactical or Vanguard can do a little bit of both, and the Assault and Bulwark really specialize at being up close and personal. Again, if you have really solid players, that's not really going to be a huge issue. I really only recommend throwing that out to people that find themselves struggling. Again, that's what had happened to me tonight. That's what I suspect what caused us to have a little bit of issues. Granted, there were also some connectivity issues as well, but I think a lot of it just came down to the way that all three of us had composed our class. We just didn't have synergy that I think we really needed to succeed in that. But those are my basic tips. Feel free, to leave your own down in the comments. What's something that you would want a new player to know, or what's something that maybe you yourself wished you had known at the beginning, and you can kind of use this as a way to greet some of the newer players into our fold of eternal servitude towards the Emperor of mankind. But as always, thank you for watching. So we won't be doing a video, as you can guess, with this coming out Tuesday. We're not going to be doing our traditional Wednesday video. However, we will have one come out Thursday, at least I hope Thursday, if not early Friday morning, and that'll just be kind of going over all the new stuff that's coming out with the update, such as the cosmetics, the small things like that. And then hopefully over the weekend we should have another one, just kind of showing off some gameplay of the new Siege mode, because Lord knows, as much as I love the operations, I will be so happy to see something different. But as always, thank you for watching, and